Welcome back to another deep dive. We are really thrilled to have you with us today. I want you to imagine a very specific, incredibly tense scene.
Right, set the stage for us.
Okay, it is late 1992. You are in Berkeley, California. The air it's thick with anxiety, and the stakes for the future of technology are just unbelievably high.
Yeah, existential, really.
Exactly. The United States government is actively trying to completely monopolize encryption. But a small underground group of rebels is deciding to fight back. And they aren't, taking to the streets with protest signs. They're fighting back with mathematics.
It really is a fascinating historical moment to drop into because the ripple effects of what happened in that specific time and place among a very niche group of technologists, they are entirely dictating the landscape of global digital finance today.
And that brings us to our mission for today's deep dive. We've got a fascinating stack of sources in front of us today, anchored by a comprehensive report on a pioneer named Eric Hughes. The text explores the philosophical and, the technological origins of digital privacy.
Which is incredibly relevant right now.
Oh, absolutely. We are going to unpack how a manifesto written way back in 1993 laid the essential groundwork for modern financial sovereignty. We'll look at how privacy is literally coded into protocols like Bitcoin. But most importantly, we're going to look at the hard data to understand why this history is absolutely crucial for protecting your own assets today.
Yeah, and to give you a sense of our trajectory, we're going to be leaning heavily into the historical context and the quantitative data provided in the materials. We'll examine everything from multi-decade fiat inflation metrics to global privacy risk indices.
So we're bringing the receipts.
Exactly. The objective is to understand exactly why this 30-year-old philosophy is not just an internet history lesson. It's a highly practical framework that is arguably more relevant to your life and your wallet right now than it has ever been.
So setting the stage back in 1992, Berkeley. The materials introduce us to some massive figures in what became known as the cypherpunk movement. You have Timothy May, you have John Gilmore, and then you have the main focus of our exploration today, Eric Hughes.
Right.
These were the giants of this early digital frontier, but they didn't all play the same role, did they?
No, they didn't. There's a crucial distinction made in the text between these figures, specifically between Timothy May and Eric Hughes. May is described essentially as the prophet of the movement.
The prophet?
Yeah, he was the one providing the sweeping political manifestos of crypto-anarchism. He was warning everyone of the impending social upheaval that the digital age would inevitably bring.
Right.
But Eric Hughes operated on a completely different wavelength. The text calls Hughes the master architect.
I love that framing.
It's accurate. While May was predicting a dystopian future, Hughes was engineering the tools to survive it. He brought an unrivaled practicality to the movement, transitioning those grand philosophical visions into concrete weapons made of code.
And they desperately needed those weapons because the existential threat at the time was massive and immediate. The sources outline the specific pressures of the era that had these technologists so worried.
Yeah, the environment was incredibly hostile.
You had things like Operation Sundevil, which wasn't just a minor regulatory change. It was a massive nationwide crackdown by the Secret Service targeting hackers. We're talking armed agents seizing computers and data across the country.
It was intimidation on a massive scale.
And then you had Senate Bill S02.66, which pushed for communication systems to legally mandate government access to plain text.
It was an overt, coordinated attempt to ensure that absolute digital privacy simply could not exist legally. And the absolute pinnacle of this was the NSA's Clipper chip.
Oh, man. The Clipper chip is wild to think about today.
It really is.
It was literally a government-endorsed piece of hardware that sought to mandate backdoors in all encryption devices. Imagine the government saying, sure, you can put a lock on your digital doors, but you were required by law to give us a master key.
Right, it completely defeats the purpose of a lock.
Exactly. So how do you even respond to that level of institutional pressure? Because Hughes didn't just, write angry letters to his representatives.
No, he responded with what the text identifies as the definitive dogma of the movement. Cypherpunks write code.
Cypherpunks write code.
In Hughes's view, code was no longer just a tool for building software. It was a form of nonviolent, direct action. If political institutions were going to try and legislate privacy out of existence, Hughes and his peers were going to use mathematics to make privacy an undeniable reality, completely independent of the law.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that brings us to a really critical philosophical breakthrough that Hughes articulated in his March 9, 1993, A Cypherpunk's Manifesto. He fundamentally deconstructed the concept of privacy by distinguishing it from secrecy.
This is perhaps his most important intellectual contribution. According to Hughes, secrecy is the act of hiding all information from everyone.
It's total darkness.
Right, it's hiding in a bunker. Privacy, on the other hand, is entirely different. Privacy is the power to selectively reveal yourself to the world. It is about agency and control over your own information.
I love the analogy the source material pulls from Hughes to explain this because it translates perfectly to how you and I use the internet today.
The email analogy.
Yeah, think about an email provider. If you send an email, the provider only needs to know where to deliver the message so the system functions. That's all. They do not need to know who you're actually talking to, and they certainly don't need to know the contents of the message.
Exactly.
That is selective revelation. You reveal the destination so the infrastructure works, but you retain agency over the contents.
And that exact definition of selective revelation is framed by the materials as the absolute cornerstone of modern asset design. The idea that ownership must be protected, yet mathematically verifiable through selective disclosure, is the foundation of everything that comes next.
Which brings us perfectly into how this 1993 philosophy translates into the modern era. Because this didn't just stay a radical theory discussed in early internet forums, it evolved into a mathematical fortress.
A literal mathematical fortress.
Specifically, the sources map Hughes's philosophy one-to-one onto the Bitcoin protocol.
The alignment is incredible, really. It's broken down into three main pillars in the report. The first is pseudonymity. Hughes argued that privacy in an open society requires anonymous transaction systems.
And Bitcoin does this perfectly.
Right. It fulfills this through its consistent address architecture. It completely separates your real-world identity from the transaction itself. Just like handing someone physical cash, you can transact without revealing who you are. You only reveal the cryptographic proof necessary for the transaction to clear on the decentralized network.
The second pillar the sources identify is trustless systems. Hughes completely rejected the idea that we should have to rely on the goodwill or what he specifically called the beneficence of third-party intermediaries, like central banks or corporate institutions, to protect us or our assets.
This is where Bitcoin essentially stepped in to fill that exact void. Its core innovation is that it's a peer-to-peer system validating transactions via code, rather than requiring trust in a central authority.
It just removes the human element entirely.
It's the ultimate realization of Hughes's doctrine. It replaces the inherent vulnerabilities of institutional trust with the cold, hard certainty of mathematics.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The third pillar is where we see Hughes's concept of selective revelation perfectly executed in modern code. The text points to the 2021 Bitcoin upgrade known as Taproot, and specifically something called Schnorr signatures.
Yes, Schnorr signatures.
Now, I am definitely not a cryptographer, so without getting bogged down in algebraic formulas, how does that math actually protect a regular user?
Well, the materials do touch on the math, specifically that it uses linear aggregation. The formula essentially looks like S equals the sum of S sub I, and R equals the sum of R sub I.
Okay, stop right there. You're going to have to translate that for me and everyone listening.
Fair enough. Think of it this way. Schnorr signatures essentially use that linear math to fold multiple complex signatures into one single key. Before this 2021 upgrade, if you had an incredibly complex smart contract or a deal requiring multiple different people to sign off a multi-signature transaction, all of that complexity and those specific conditions would be completely visible to anyone looking at the public ledger.
So basically a massive lack of privacy. Anyone could see exactly how your business logic was structured.
Precisely. Everyone can see the wiring of the house, so to speak. But with the linear aggregation of Schnorr signatures, all of those different signers and specific conditional branches are mathematically mashed together.
So what does it look like on the outside?
To anyone looking from the outside, it just looks like one simple, boring payment. The complex, specific conditions of the contract are only ever revealed to the actual participants when it is executed.
That is brilliant. It's the literal digital execution of Hughes's selective revelation. You prove the transaction is valid to the network, but you keep the mechanics entirely private.
Exactly. And to prove how robust this philosophy is, the materials assign Hughes's privacy principles a Lindy score of 94%.
A Lindy score, right. For those unfamiliar, the Lindy effect basically proposes that the future life expectancy of some non-perishable things like a technology or an idea is proportional to their current age.
Right. The longer it survives, the longer it's expected to keep surviving.
So a 94% score means that surviving 3 decades of massive technological evolution and intense regulatory scrutiny proves these aren't just fringe theories anymore. They are resilient, essential requirements for preserving assets today.
Which naturally leads to the practical application of all this. Why does a 94% Lindy score or a 1993 manifesto matter to your wallet right now?
That is the million-dollar question.
We have to look at the financial reality outlined in the report, in a section appropriately titled The Data of Decay.
The data of decay. Just the name is intense.
It is, but the numbers back it up. They contrast fiat inflation against Bitcoin's purchasing power, using 1993 as the base year, and the data is quite revealing.
The contrast is staggering. Looking at Table 1, which cites U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics data, since the Cypherpunk Manifesto was published in 1993, cumulative U.S. dollar inflation has hit 110.5% by the year 2025.
110.5%. Let that sink in for a second.
I know. That means if you had a crisp $100 bill in 1993 and kept it perfectly safe in a vault, today, the actual purchasing power of that bill is only worth $47.50. More than half of the value you work for has just decayed away.
Now observe the data provided on Bitcoin. When the Genesis block was mined in 2009, U.S. inflation had already eroded that 1993 $100 bill down to roughly $68.
So the decay was already well underway.
Exactly. But Bitcoin was designed from day one with a fixed, immutable supply. Fast forward to the post-pandemic liquidity expansion in 2021, the dollar's value from 1993 dropped to around $51, while Bitcoin's supply growth, its inflation rate, dropped to roughly 1.8% after its third halving.
And looking at the 2025 data, while the dollar's purchasing power continues to decay, Bitcoin's inflation rate is dropping to approximately 0.8% following its fourth halving. The sources note this makes it mathematically scarcer than gold.
But a mathematical philosophy only matters if people actually adopt it in the real world.
Right, theory is great, but are people using it?
The on-chain metrics show they definitely are. The practical adoption of Hughes' tools is accelerating. Let's look at Table 3. For instance, monthly CoinJoin volume, which is a method specifically used to anonymize transactions by mixing them together, that grew from roughly 1,500 Bitcoin in 2020 to about 8,500 Bitcoin by 2025.
That is a massive jump. And those Taproot upgrades we just talked about, the ones that hide complex contracts behind a single signature with that Schnorr math.
Adoption went from essentially zero in 2020 to stabilizing around 15% of all transactions by 2025.
And what about SegWit? The report mentions that too.
Yes, SegWit usage. For those who might not live and breathe blockchain architecture, SegWit was an earlier upgrade that separated signature data from transaction data to improve efficiency. That usage jumped from 55% in 2020 to a massive 95% in 2025.
So the takeaway here is that people aren't just holding this asset, they are actively seeking out and utilizing the privacy layers built into it.
Taking a step back, though, what happens if society ignores Eric Hughes' warnings? The text paints a very clear and rather dystopian picture of that alternative.
Yeah, it does. It revolves entirely around the rise of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs.
The sources use some incredibly intense phrasing when framing this threat.
They really do. The authors warn that turning over our assets to CBDCs, or fully centralized exchanges, risks turning private property into what they call ration coupons.
Ration coupons.
Think about the mechanics of that. Under a CBDC system, you are living under mandatory total disclosure. Because the money is programmable by a central authority, they could theoretically control when you can spend your money, restrict where you can spend it, or even dictate if you are allowed to spend your own wealth based on arbitrary rules.
The materials frame this within the broader context of what is termed surveillance capitalism. They provide a global financial privacy risk index for the year 2025, which ranks major jurisdictions on a scale of 1 to 10 based on their CBDC implementations and financial trapping.
With 10 representing the absolute highest risk of privacy violation.
Right. And the real-world examples given in Table 2 are chilling. China is running a nationwide CBDC pilot, and the text gives it a perfect 10.0 privacy risk level.
A perfect 10. Why so high?
Because the asset tracking is designed to be directly linked to their social credit scores. Your ability to participate in the economy is inherently tied to your societal behavior as judged by the state.
That is terrifying. India is also highly ranked on this index, sitting at an 8.7 risk level. Their expanding pilot includes capabilities to track even offline usage of the digital currency.
Yeah, extending the surveillance perimeter far beyond active internet connections.
Moving westward, the European Union sits at a 7.5 risk level. They are deep in the development phase, with sweeping regulations like MiCA, the markets, and crypto assets regulation, which enforces strict tracking and one-to-one reserve mandates.
And then there's the U.S., which is currently at a 5.5 risk level.
Lower, but still concerning.
The text notes that while retail CBDCs in the U.S. are currently halted, the regulatory focus has heavily shifted toward controlling private stablecoins to achieve similar oversight.
The overarching threat the authors derive from this global landscape is clear. Without the privacy afforded by open-source, mathematically enforced code, your assets are not truly yours. They become merely temporary permissions granted by a central authority. They can be frozen, seized, or restricted based on political participation or automated algorithms.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because we have been talking about this mathematical fortress like it's an absolute sanctuary. But the sources do dive into a critical metacognition section, and we need to acknowledge that total, unbreakable privacy has a massive dark side.
That is a vital counterpoint. The text explicitly acknowledges that total privacy is a double-edged sword, carrying a very real, very significant social cost.
Right.
Because the exact same cryptographic tools that protect a political dissident's anonymity or safeguard your family's savings from an authoritarian regime can be entirely co-opted for deeply illicit activities.
We are talking about the facilitation of money laundering or the funding of antisocial criminal enterprises.
Exactly. Hughes's philosophy of pure mathematics does not care if you are a human rights activist or a cartel boss. It protects the innocent and the guilty with equal mathematical indifference. And that presents a profound ethical dilemma.
Furthermore, the text identifies what it calls the elitism problem inherent in the very doctrine of cypherpunks' right code.
The elitism problem.
Yeah. Think about it. If exercising your fundamental human right to privacy requires a high degree of technical mastery understanding self-custody, managing private keys, utilizing CoinJoins, you risk creating a new, highly stratified class divide.
Right. If I need the equivalent of a computer science degree to be truly free, isn't that just a new oligarchy? In that scenario, only the technologically literate elite are truly sovereign, while the vast majority of society remains heavily monitored and restricted by centralized systems.
Which ties directly into a behavioral concept the materials call the privacy paradox. If you consider our daily habits, the paradox becomes obvious. How often do users simply click accept all cookies without reading? Or use a highly centralized data harvesting payment app simply because it is fast and ubiquitous?
We do it constantly. I mean, I did it this morning. Most of us routinely sacrifice our personal privacy for the sheer convenience of centralized platforms.
We trade it away.
We do. And the text frankly suggests that Hughes's ultimate vision of a completely self-sovereign, hyper-private individual might not actually align with human nature. A significant portion of the population seems perfectly willing to trade their financial freedom for comfort, ease of use, and social cohesion.
It creates a profound tension as we look at the data. On one side of the spectrum, you have the creeping reality of the Ration coupon economy under programmable, centralized digital currencies.
And on the other side?
On the other side, you have the steep technical learning curve and the undeniable ethical gray areas of absolute, mathematically guaranteed privacy.
So bringing all these threads together, what is the core takeaway from this deep dive into Eric Hughes and his legacy? The literature ultimately concludes that Hughes fundamentally proved that privacy isn't something you can politely ask for from political institutions.
No, it's something that is won through mathematics and direct action.
Exactly. As we move further into this decade, the sources argue that adopting self-custody and privacy-enhancing technologies isn't just a niche investment strategy for tech enthusiasts anymore. It is becoming a necessary survival mechanism against an encroaching system of surveillance capitalism.
The data presents a very stark choice for the future of digital assets. We are essentially standing at a crossroads between accepting mandatory total disclosure on centralized state-run ledgers or securing our autonomy behind the mathematical barbed wire of self-sovereignty that Hughes and the cypherpunks helped design over 30 years ago.
It certainly makes you evaluate every digital transaction you make and where you store the value you've created. As we wrap up today, we want to leave you with a final, lingering question to ponder long after we sign off. It builds on the elitism problem we just discussed, but it is a hurdle we absolutely need to figure out as a society.
And that is?
If true financial privacy is rapidly becoming a mathematical fortress built by and for those who deeply understand the code, how do we ensure that the average person who just wants to buy their groceries without their data being harvested and tracked isn't left entirely outside the gates, leaving this sovereign freedom only to a tiny, technologically literate elite.
A vital challenge for the next generation of builders to consider.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning the systems around you, and we will catch you next time.